Hemshech Chaim Beis, Volume 1, with the end of Discourse 43, Rosh Chana, middle of page 353, chapter 174, page Shin and Gimel. And the presenting discussion is about two levels of Torah. One you call the outer Torah, the inner Torah. And this is part of the discussion. This is coming to explain Torah as interface. As interface between the divine and the existence. So God looked into the Torah, created the world. So clearly the Torah is that interface. Torah comes, as he explained, not just from Chachma of Atzilus, but from Chachma of Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon has these two elements as well. It's a klal to the prat. It's the vision, the picture of all of existence. And then it comes into each detail and each time in its space. So Torah is the same way. It has a klal and the prat. Torah has a whole picture. Torah Chsumanit, the Torah was given as one whole entity. And then there's the Torah that is given in each time in its place to its fitting respective time and space. Okay. A second. Right. Now, to explain it, he used the Maimar Chazal and Shaitan that David called Chukecha Zmiris Chayili Chukecha. The Gemara says, was that Zmiris Kuris, David's Zmiris Kurisala, who David called Torah Zmiris. He praised Meshabeach. He lauded the Torah as Zmiris, as songs. And for that he was punished. Caused the obvious question, why was he punished? The answer is because the Torah has a far deeper dimension. So David was focusing on his needs. He was escaping from and dealing with the suffering and pain. So he, to console himself, he used the Torah and said that the whole existence is dependent on one digduk, one detail of the Torah. Also Zmiris from the word Zamar Aritzim, to uproot weeds. So to eliminate the supply lines that feed the klipa, the negative, as we discussed, you do it through two ways, like a double-edged sword, cherev kefiyas, a sword of two sides that cuts it off from the top and from the bottom, from the makif and from the ribuy tzimtzumim, from the detachment above and from the many dimensions below. So David is focusing on that, but in truth, the inner dimension of Torah, the real nature of Torah, is that it's shashuya hamelech batzmus, is the expression. V'eis shashuyim b'fanav. It's God's playthings. Meaning it's God's pleasure. Torah is not just, as much as the whole world depends on Torah, Torah is beyond existence, and it's really a divine pleasure. It's an expression of the divine. So Torah Ered, he says, so David was punished not because he learned Torah this way, because he praised Torah this way. To learn Torah this way and then be able to use it for his purposes is fine, but his shvach ended up being somewhat diminishing what the Torah really is, in its full sense of the word. So relatively speaking, that was considered inappropriate.
What does it mean if learn Torah for his own purposes, that is okay? What would that mean?
He learns Torah in order to console himself, in order to help himself raise above his suffering. But the shvach, once he dictated that this is the shvach of Torah, this is Torah, that by defining it as such and praising it as such, that's what he says in Torah. Just adding a little footnote to the whole discussion. The bottom line is that what David did was absolutely fine, but there's a dimension in Torah that he so-called did not mention, and that was what we're talking about here. So using this to explain the two parts in Torah, two dimensions in Torah. Now, in the chapter we're up.
If he had praise on both levels, that would be acceptable?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, we are now in chapter 174, which we're, in chapter, 174. So he has the question, if Torah is not the pleasure and the joy of human beings, but the pleasure and joy of God, how God sees things, like he says, B'yediyas atzmi yedeyas HaTorah, is the expression he does. So then why was David punished? How can we relate to the divine pleasure, something beyond us? So to explain this, he explained that in mitzvahs, similarly in mitzvahs, we have to have two intentions. There's the mitzvah as it affects and draws down energy in a particular way. Each mitzvah has its particular function. And you could have joy in that too, how the mitzvah transforms you and the world. But then there's an element of a mitzvah that is beyond that. And that is how the mitzvah, your joy is because God has joy. It's not because it does something, not because of its function or its outcome, but you have joy not in the Ratzon, but in the Baal HaRatzon, the one who desired it. The one who desired it, you have the pleasure and the joy that you were able to fulfill what he desired. Whereas he goes deeper, there's two other higher levels. That it's not even the pleasure of you doing it, it's the pleasure that he has pleasure that his desire was fulfilled. And then the highest level he talks about where his pleasure becomes your pleasure. Just because God has pleasure, we have pleasure. So it's not about the function of the mitzvah and its impact and its outcome, which is all true too. It's about the source, meaning God, having pleasure from it. We didn't yet conclude inside how that applies to David, but he's basically leading to that point. The next thing we learned was to explain this. He explained it with an Eved and an Oded, a servant and a master. So he said that the difference between these two ways, whether the mitzvah is for the function of it, or in the pleasure of the source itself, the pleasure of the one who wants it. He says, if the mitzvah is in the a function, so then it's in the outcome of the mitzvah. Like he calls it the bechein, the outcome. But if you're doing it because it gives pleasure to God, then the joy is in the mitzvah itself, because he wants the mitzvah, not just the outcome, not just its effect. Yeah. So the example he gives, imagine a servant who's building a product. Keli, he calls it a machine or a product or anything for a king. And he does it in the best possible way. He's mahadir b'malacha, that's his expression. He does it with care and concern. He's a perfectionist. He's doing it with the highest quality. It's a very interesting example. So he said the only way he can do it is if he has pleasure in doing it. Because if you're just doing it to be Yetzer, building it to be Yetzer, then if you don't have pleasure in your work, then you're not going to do it in the best possible way. And he gives an example of a person who's a real craftsman. A real craftsman who's a real professional has pleasure in giving, wants to give you the best possible product because he's simply a quality person, and he has joy in what he does. If his pleasure is only in pleasing you, or being praised and getting an award, use this as an example, for his work, that means his real pleasure is from the outcome, more of the vanity of it. He doesn't say vanity, but from the outcome, not from the thing itself. Then he will not do the best possible job. He'll do enough to satisfy. That's what he says. So if his pleasure is just from making something beautiful, or that others will praise him because he did it, but if he's a professional and really is a true skilled person and simply will not give you something unless it was a perfect job, that means he enjoys simply what he's doing, then it will be the best possible thing. So the Eved has to have, if he's going to make something of the perfect, has to have that pleasure. However, with the Eved, he explains, the pleasure doesn't come because, like the craftsman, because he's a professional who enjoys what he does. His pleasure is so an extension of the pleasure of the master, and therefore he also has pleasure, and therefore he'll do it in the best possible way. That's what he says. So in a sense, because he's so bottled, he's so subjugated to his master, see, even if he himself doesn't have such refined skills and refined sense, he says this, he will assume the refinement of his master because he wants to is bottled to satisfying his pleasure that his pleasure becomes, the master's pleasure becomes the servant's pleasure, and the servant's craftsmanship will become better as a result. That's what he says. K'moy keinu b'mitzvos, I'm continuing to read here from the middle of page 353. That's the example. The pleasure above is his pleasure. He has vitality and pleasure. The actual, the core mitzvah. Even though the servant does not know at all the quality and the value of the mitzvah, only God knows that. But because of his core and fundamental bitl, total self-dedication to Atzmus Ein Sof she'ena mitzias la'atzmei, that this servant is not a mitzias at all for himself. There's no self. Because of that, he has vitality and pleasure in the core mitzvah, because this is the pleasure that's above. And he lives with it, with core vitality. Not just chayes mispashit would be like, you throw a stone. Throw a stone, you're taking energy, you're exerting your energy to throw a stone. Not a chayes atzmi, you're giving a part of your energy to a stone, you don't have that investment. Chay atzmi means your whole core being is alive with this. Okay. Now, this is not just a side discussion. This happens to be the whole basis of Ayin Beis. Remember, we're learning why the Erhab Bligvul, what's the purpose, the whole discussion, all this is coming to explain, is the difference between Avos and Matan Torah. And the Avos, the patriarchs, they brought down energy that is commensurate to existence, basically Erhab Bligvul, to the extent, to the maximum that you can do it, expanding the pipes. Matan Torah brings a Chiddush, brings something that's beyond existence. As in discussion we're talking now, the pleasure of the divine. Not just what it does for the world. But a higher consciousness. Think of it this way. So let's just make this clear. If you were able to just enjoy Torah the way David HaMelech did, or the way the others did, which is to the extent that it helps, that all of existence is dependent on one letter in the Torah, one detail, Mashiach would be here. So let's not minimize that effort. But that's not suffice. That doesn't suffice Chassidus Chabad, and that's not the ultimate. The ultimate is that you want a relationship with God on God's terms. Not just making the world as good as it could be and relate to God, which would be like Mamal Kalam. So if every one of us knew, every second, 24/7, that every aspect of our lives, every breath we take, every move we make, every stone, every leaf is divine, that's still not what he's saying here. Then that's just recognizing the divine within existence, the way the divine relates to existence. So you must have that first, obviously. But the goal to really have an interface, a relationship with God, is also to understand God on God's terms. Because the world is ultimately God's, a very limited expression of the divine. God, if someone say, is this world the all of God? No, you say the Humukay Mishalel. He's the space of the world, but the world is not his space. He created everything in existence is him, but he's not existence. Like, not pantheism as Spinoza said, that nature is God and God is nature, but that all is God, but God is beyond the all. So and that's where Torah comes in. Torah introduces us to the divine mind, not as it's in science and nature. There's also the mind. Of course, there's the divine mind. When we understand science, we understand physics, we understand the laws that God created, you're understanding God's mind. But that's God's mind as he applies himself to existence. That would be like Yisrael Sabbath Funa that we learned. But you want Yichud Abba V'Imei Eloi, and the higher Chacham Bina, which is from God's perspective, that's where Torah comes in. It gives us a picture from a different sense. Remember, Primi Yisak, if you remember. Chetzeni Yisak is the picture that encompasses all of existence. Primi Yisak is somewhat of a taste of Ein Sof, what it looks like from the other side of the curtain. How God looks at it all. And that's the point here. How does that translate in Avodah? What he just said here with the mitzvahs. If you're talking about a mitzvah, it does for you, it refines you, makes you a better person, it mamshech brachos in your life, it transforms the world, all great. That's how the mitzvahs relate to existence. But the simcha in a mitzvah, and there's great simcha in that. the joy of bringing down God into this existence, changing the world, changing yourself. But if you want to know what a mitzvah is in its deepest form, is what it does for God, which is a pleasure. There's a pleasure that God has from that. In other words, it's not just about its functionality. Yes, the pleasure is from its function, but how does God relate to the mitzvah? Relate to the mitzvah is just the pleasure of the master. Like he says, even if he told you to go chop wood, where you won't see the same function as putting on film. Putting on film, you say, okay, that's very sensible. I have a mind and a heart, they don't speak to each other. Shibud halev amayach. I put on film. I align my mind and my heart that should all go in one direction. Kashrus refines us in one way. I'm not even getting out whether all the mitzvahs have an actual logical reason, but they all have a function. And they can't, even a chukkah that is also has a function. It's a function to relate to something beyond our seichel. So the point that he's making here is that if you want to understand it from God's perspective, which is that's what really that creates a different level of bittul. Because here the bittul is going to be to the ratzon. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it perfectly. But the Baal HaRatzon, the one who wants it all, that bittul is a real bittul that completely is beyond existence itself. And that is introduced to the second level of simcha, which is the simcha of the joy and the pleasure that the source has. And that itself, he spoke 3 levels. The pleasure and joy can be because I merited to be the channel. I merited to be the shliach, so to speak. I merited to the one that fulfills his desire. That is a deeper level. It's not about you, that you merited it. That you have joy from the fact that the desire of God was fulfilled, even if someone else did it. And the third level is that you have no other joy. Your whole joy is simply just an extension of divine pleasure. So this highest level of bittul is when we really reach the point of Erev HaBligvul. That's how Erev HaBligvul affects us. It's irrelevant, the details. God has pleasure, I have pleasure, and that transforms me, makes me into a better craftsman, and I do it with a full intensity, and for the mitzvah itself, not for its outcome. It's the purest level of the Shema, basically. The ultimate selfless dedication. But you're not annihilating yourself, because number one, you still have the first kavanah. Remember, the first is also, it's important to know its function. So you've traveled upwards, you're going from the bottom up. And secondly, when you connect to this, it's not like eliminating who you are, it's permeating who you are, but now you're permeated with God's pleasure. So instead of being generated from you, it's being generated from above. He doesn't spell this out, but it's very clear here that you need both sides, because you're talking about the interface. There's also Torah as it applies to the world. Basically, the Torah that we have to do on a daily basis. We can't just jump to Shashui, how it's God's pleasure. You have to have the Torah as it affects us and relates to us, and we're part of it, and then we give away our part, so to speak. So my pleasure is no longer coming because I have pleasure from the function. I start having pleasure from the pleasure of the source, because God has pleasure in it. And therefore, I too am now infused with the pleasure as if it was my own, or it's not as if, it actually is your own, and that actually makes you a better human being, because a better at whatever you're doing, because you're doing it with pleasure. So you could have, for example, you could have a level where, okay, you know what, I have pleasure because I know the Torah is effective helping my life. You guys mentioned Shibud Halev Amelech, film that. Or Torah, I enjoy learning. I know it makes my mind better. Not just sharpens my mind, it also makes my mind more godly. I understand God. There's a pleasure in that. It's my pleasure. And there's this, and that's fine. It's fine as long as you know there's more, obviously. It's fine on the first level. Then you come to the next level and you say, you know what? My pleasure. Kabbalah says I shouldn't be doing it with pleasure. My pleasure is what counts. But God's pleasure is what counts. But the question is, what happens to your pleasure? So you can say, you know what? I put that aside. I'm going to do it like an Eved. As much as I appreciate and I enjoy and I take pleasure in its function, I put that aside. I'm going to do it now like a servant that doesn't even think, that doesn't feel. That's not enough. That's an Eved Pashut, like he says in some above. Then comes a third level, that God's pleasure becomes your pleasure. So it permeates you. You now are as alive and as pleasurable as you were when you did it for your own, because a function. But now you've become an extension of God's pleasure. You've become a keli that His pleasure is your pleasure. And therefore, that's its ultimate unity. Now, obviously, without saying as much, he doesn't say it, there's no way you can come to level 3 without going through level 1 and 2. But clearly, that's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is that you begin first so to speak, mamalakal pnimis. Do it because it relates to you. Then you come to a point that you expect something that's beyond you, and you surrender to that. But then that beyond becomes also you. And that's when there's the full union. Now, I'm spelling it out, even though he hasn't said it, but just to keep the picture complete here.
How can you accomplish the third level?
Because
in other words,
there's this philosophically and psychologically, I'll answer the question. I understand the question. Philosophically, the answer is because Hashem Hu Elokim, the same God that is in existence, is also beyond existence. So even though we relate to God, let's say, for example, we all can appreciate, I said, God, thank you for giving me another day. Thank you, I breathe every second, easily. I eat, Hazanas HaKol. Birchos HaMazon. All the Birchos HaNenin, all the blessings we make for the pleasures that we have in this world. And if a person focuses, blessings all around. Every second is a blessing. Let's just say a person is in that consciousness. Now, is there something wrong with that? Obviously not, because that's better than living a selfish life where you're just thinking about yourself all the time. You're focusing and thanking, acknowledging. But if you think that's where it ends with God, that's where David, that's God that relates to you, and that's perfect. And without that, you're not really going anywhere. You can't just jump to the next level. What Chassidus then expects of us is like this. Okay, that's fine. But God wants a relationship with you that's deeper than that. That would be, basically, you're relating to God on your terms. And you don't really have a marriage. A marriage means they also have the other partner expressing themselves like, what does God want? This is like when the Alter Rebbe said to that Chassid, he says, okay, you tell me everything you want, and now what is you tell me everything you need. Now what do you need it for? So, without going into the whole philosophical explanation, which I've done here, there's a next level where you come to recognize that God is beyond beyond giving you life and all the blessings. So there, in a way, you're now focusing not on yourself, even though you acknowledge all that I said, but you're focusing there's something beyond you. Now, why is that necessary? As I explained many times, that's necessary because that creates real bittul. The first one, ultimately, it's on your terms. So at the end of the day, it's not. It's far easier to make a mistake, and it's far easier to become vain. But now I have God on my side because He's giving me life. So the second level is more creates a type of, I would say, awe and respect. That's the God is beyond who you are. But that would seem to require, and does require initially, a recognition. I'll use an example in a marriage, where you realize your spouse is beyond you. There's a mystery about her or him. And that's healthy. So there's a part where you're close and relate to each other, and there's a mystery. And that mystique is very much part of the relationship. Actually, it helps create vitality in the relationship, so you don't just take each other for granted. It's not like there's no control here. There's something that's beyond the parties. But then the question is, can you go to another level? Can the beyond become also part of who you are? And the answer is yes. Because philosophically, Hashem Hu Elokim, the same God that gives us life, is also a God that's beyond life. So when you actually appreciate it, you can actually come to become part of, and that doesn't contradict. The God that is beyond and the God that's within, let's call it that way, is the same Hashem. We say Hashem Elokim, we say Yom Kippur, we say it so many times. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Elokeinu. So the transcendent God is one with the immanent divine. So then ultimately, and this takes a lot of work, this is when Mashiach will come, we'll have the ultimate picture, where your personality will become one with the divine personality. So, on God's terms. Now, so that means the following. You start off with your personality on your terms. You infuse it with God, you appreciate God's blessings and gives you that personality and blesses you. You come to realize God's personality is beyond your personality. And God's consciousness is beyond your consciousness. And when you do that and train yourself enough, ultimately God's consciousness then permeates yours. And your personality that you begin with has now been elevated to becoming an extension. You are ultimately an extension of the divine personality, even as you are your details.
I can understand 1 and 2 clearly. It's 3 I'm having trouble with. In other words, if you get to a level where you have complete bittul, and you're just doing what you do to please God, you don't care what happens to you. For instance, Abraham with the Akedah, sacrificing his son. Right? It would seem to me that the third level...
That's level 2.
That's level 2, right. But it would seem to me that the third level would have to be something that we can't do ourselves. It just has to be a gift from God, not something that we could actually
You could
somehow live a life that would get to level 3.
One second, no, so. Yeah, you do level 1 and 2,
Right.
and then you get that gift.
So it's a gift from above. It's not something
But it's a
that
gift
we
that,
can do.
it's like the gift of Matan Torah. You don't count 49 days, you can't get the 50th. So it's a gift, but a gift that only comes after your work. In other words, if you're not refined enough, you're not going to be able to receive this gift. This gift cannot just be given to anybody. This is primarily the reason, by the way, why we're in Golos. We're now 3 weeks, right? So it says the mashal of the Berditchever, the mashal that he gave the example, like a king who made he knitted a beautiful garment for his son, suit, garment. The son then used it and tore it. That's the destruction of the first temple. So he made even a nicer one, and again he destroyed it. And then he said, this time I'm not going to give it to you. I'm going to let you watch it. Every year, Shabbos Chazon, you have a vision, you can see it from a distance, the third Beis HaMikdash, and now you have to earn it. So my answer to you is like this. It's not a gift that just comes. It won't come from above. It's when you refine yourself enough. That's the whole point. Matan Torah did not come until the Ovis did their work. If you don't first fill yourself up on your level as much as you can with that presence, and then the second level, which is so-called surrender, the third cannot be given. So the third is a gift, but it's a gift directly connected to your avodah, to your work. That's number
So
one.
you can accomplish it. Unlike becoming a tzaddik, which is not under your control.
Hold on, but I want to say one very important point. I want to just talk psychologically now. I spoke philosophically. Let's talk psychologically. I'll just use this as a mind experiment, okay? We talked about it before. Is this world a finite world? Everyone would say yes, it is. People die. Everything in this world arose. Everything has parameters. There's nothing that doesn't have parameters. Gvul. But we're learning here in Ayin Beis especially that the gvul of the world, the way God sees it, is simply another manifestation of God's gvul. We, because we have limited vision, and we ourselves are creatures, and finite entities, so we see the finite like that. But if you ask God, from God's perspective, from God's eyes, the finite, as he said, is a medida atzmis. He chose that instead of infinite spheres, he will have 10 spheres. Think of it, an artist that can create infinite amount of art. He chose to make one piece of art that looks like this. Now you could say, okay, that's God's domain. I never can relate to that. Or, and Ayin Beis makes it very clear, he wants to say that you could relate to it. But it takes work. First you have to come to realize that you shouldn't be consumed by your material parameters. Don't think your reality is it. Because that's the first block. If you think your reality is it, you're not open to any other perspective. The second step is permeating this reality and doing mitzvahs with parameters. Every mitzvah has a shir. You may say Shema at a certain time, you daven Shachris at a certain time, Mincha and Ma'ariv. There's Pesach, there's Shavuos, there's Sukkot, there's Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. There's different mitzvahs in different time and space. And you basically elevate the gvul of this world by using it for what God wanted you to use it. That's level 1. Level 2, you come to realize this whole gvul, what is it? It's a finite creation compared to Bli Gvul Velikus. It's valueless. It's valuable because God wants you to be here and do it, so not Messiah, but it has no value of its own. Then you come to level 3 where you say, you know what, this gvul, when I just did this mitzvah, I see it as a limited thing. I ate a matzah a certain way. Shabbos came Friday, but the truth is, it's a medida atzmis. It's the infinite artist expressing himself in a finite way, and you align yourself to that type of thinking. And before Mashiach will come, I don't know if any of us can come to that complete perception, but philosophically, you could relate to the concept. So it's not just something miraculous. It means the same you and the same parameters is suddenly seen from a divine consciousness perspective. But they can't get there without going through levels 1 and 2. And, as you said correctly, there is a point where Mashiach will come down and says God will shecht. Basically, he'll sacrifice the Yetzer Hara, he'll destroy it. Ruach HaTum Avim in order to remove the toxins, which are not in our power to do. And then there will be open to a completely new type of consciousness. I will say one more thing, it's very important, I think. The Alter Rebbe said, this is the foundation of learning Chassidus. he said it says there's an Amos, I think. I'm not sure which one. In Tanakh, there's a prophecy. V'hasiresi leva evan. That I will remove from you your heart of stone, and mesati l'chol lev shel basar, and I'll give you a heart of flesh. That's what it says. So actually, we have now hearts of stone. So the Alter Rebbe, he was once asked, I think, about Chabad Chassidus or something, but his answer is unbelievable. It's so relevant to us. He was asked, he asked the question, why does it say Hasiresi leva evan? It should say Meichev. We only have hearts of stone, we also have minds of stone. And God will replace the mind of stone with a mind of flesh. We black those in the mind. So Alter Rebbe answered, because the mind you have control over. Even in Golus, even in Mizman Hazeh, you can remove your mind of stone. You don't need God to do that. But to remove the heart of stone, because emotionally, we are emotionally attached to the material world. And you can't be criticized for that. You can be criticized for indulging in it and for doing more than necessity. But that's how we're created. Adam karavetz alatzmai. If you didn't feel pain, hunger, you can die from hunger. So God made us that we feel hunger when we wake up. We feel hunger when tinnitus is that you're going to feel hungry. Or else a tinnitus would have no value if it doesn't make you feel hungry or thirsty. So our emotions. So intellectually we can say, I don't want to be dependent on food or materialism. But emotionally, we're bound emotionally to this material world. Again, what we have to do is make sure not to go more than necessary. But we're bound. So that can only, so the mind can be, so you can go with your mind, what psychologists like to call, I use this all the time, the cognitive life raft. Emotionally, for example, you may have a fear of certain things. People have fear, like a child may be afraid to go into a dark closet with a monster there. Or something may have happened to us when we were children, so we're afraid of certain things. That's emotional fear. Intellectually, someone says, do you really think there's a monster in there? No, I don't think, but emotionally, I'm afraid of the dark, whatever it may be. I have an uncle passed away, Fitzy Lipsky, so Fitzy Lipsky was in Arstock. So he woke up in the middle of the night, there were thunderstorms, and he came running to my grandmother, to her bed, and saying, scared. The thunders were very loud. He said, Fitzy, don't be afraid of anything except God. So he goes back to sleep. Then another thunderstorm. So he comes running again to his mother. His mother says, what, I told you. He says, I'm afraid of God. That's what he said. So, just a nice story. So emotional. So what's one of the ways in psychology how you help someone to get beyond fears? You say, you know what? Let's imagine you're afraid to go jump into the water or swim because, God forbid, you saw someone drown or you're afraid of drowning. So let's imagine yourself. Sometimes you use your mind and you imagine something, and once you call it a cognitive life raft. Once you imagine it, your mind can go up to places further than your heart will allow you to go. Then you can come back and say, my mind wasn't so difficult, now let's try it. And it works. If you do it enough times, it works. So you can apply exactly the same idea. With our minds, we can understand these three levels. The heart, ultimately, yes, there's going to be difficulty. We have difficulty even getting to level 1. Forget about level 2 and 3. But level 3, for sure, on our own, I don't think it's possible. And he said it earlier when we spoke about Riyah Samahus, to actually see the face of God, or to relate to God on God's level, made it clear it's a thing that comes in the future. But the Rebbe Rashab is explaining what the dynamics are for it, and in our minds we can understand that third level, where you will exist, but you'll exist as God sees you, not as you see yourself. And it's not a contradiction to the parameters of existence, because God put them there as well. So I would say we have to try our best to conceive of this, do our best in that type of dedication. We could give examples, even in models in life.
Tzaddikim.
Okay, but we're talking about for us, on our level. I would say the following: that sometimes Chassidim and a Rebbe, and Chassidim in the dedication to the Rebbe, somewhat emulate these type of levels, where, the classic. And I'm going to give an example. 3 types of Chassidim. 3 types of shluchim, if you wish. The Rebbe speaks about 3 levels of shlichus. So we know like this. Let's start with the rule. A shliach, according to halacha, cannot be a servant, and cannot be a child. Because a servant doesn't have any independence, and a child is an extension of his parent. A shliach has to be a bar das b'fnei atzmi. Bar das, he has to have seichel. And then he has to, at his own volition, a volition rather, his own volition, his own choice. Yeah. Has to choose to be your shliach. This I'm talking even halacha.
Right.
You send a shliach for a kedushin or a shliach to do a mission. And then he says, yes, I'll do the job for you. So the question is, shluchah shalad m'kamaisa, he becomes like the mishalech. The question is, to what extent? Is only the action, I'm doing the action for you, so my action is like as if you did it. So the kedushin is a kedushin. Or is also his hand, when he gives the kedushin, also like an extension of the hand of the mishalech. Or is your whole being now like the mishalech? And even there's levels. So I'll tell the story with Tzemach Tzedek. I think it was with Mordechai Tzvi, Mordechai Leib, I don't remember what the name was. Chassid. Tzemach Tzedek used to go to Petersburg to deal with government, make life a little easier for the Jews. Once he couldn't travel, so he chose this Chassid, a very distinguished Chassid, to go for him on his behalf. The Chassid asked Tzemach Tzedek, what should I do if I have a doubt? Then you couldn't just pick up a phone or send an email or a text. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, you should reflect, and whatever your das atzme, whatever your intelligence, use your intelligence basically. When the Rebbe Marash heard him say that, he didn't say anything, but in his mind he thought that this chassid is not a complete chassid. Because what do you mean a chassid has das atzme? Has like independent intelligence. He saw it as like, okay, it's a good, he's going to do the job well, but he's like his own agenda as well. Subtly. Anyway, he went off to Petersburg. It was Shabbos by the table, and Tzemach Tzedek suddenly got very serious, and he says that Mordechai, whatever the name of the chassid was, matatzich. He sensed that the chassid was struggling in Petersburg. And everybody waited a few minutes, and Tzedek suddenly smiled, and he said that he solved the problem. And good, he said. Good. It means he did as I would have done. Tzemach Tzedek sensed that. The Rebbe Marash realized then that on the contrary, this chassid was even greater than he thought. Because he had das atzmi, yes, but it was aligned with the Rebbe's way of thinking. So you see here 3 levels of a chassid. You could have a person who's a puppet. A puppet doesn't have any seichel of his own. The Rebbe tells him, go chop wood, he chops wood. Go to Petersburg, goes to Petersburg. But he cannot come up with any innovation of his own. It's basically a clone, so to speak. So on one hand you could say, great, that's beautiful. He doesn't have an independent agenda. He does only what the Rebbe wants, does only what God wants. No, that's not. That's a low level. That's the lowest level. Then there's another person who has his own opinions. But he respects the Rebbe as an intelligent man, and he works for him. But I'm also a mandam. I'm an opinion, the Rebbe is an opinion. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we may not agree. That's the level 2. So what he has is the quality going for him is that he thinks about it. He's not just a blind servant. But on the other hand, his independence, he has his own opinions too. And then there's a third level. A person who has independence, he knows how to think on his own, and he's innovative, and can come up with a solution when the Rebbe is not there, when he doesn't have a direct directive because he's intelligent. But he aligns his intelligence with the intelligence of Torah. And I say this the chassid and Rebbe, but the same applies to Torah. Some people say Torah tells you to do this. So you're basically just a blind servant. You don't think on your own. You're not free thinker. This is a big critique of religion, that it's dogmatic. It just tells you what to do. God tells you what to do, so you have no brains on your own. And the truth is, there are many Jews that can behave that way. There are many people who are brainless, and they just do whatever they're ordered to do, and that's it. And they follow the herd with like level 1. Then there's level 2. People are intelligent, but the Torah is a respectable system. I listen to it, but hey, sometimes I have a different opinion. The highest level, and that's what the Torah demands. V'yadaita, know God, feel God. The Torah does not want a puppet. On the other hand, the Torah also says, don't think you're self-made. Torah wants, be yourself, be an independent self, but be smart enough to realize that and use your innovation, but align it with God's way of thinking. What does this mean? I'll talk about a student and a teacher. There are teachers who teach brilliantly, but they don't know how to teach a student to be independent. They can give you information and they have answers for every question and they're brilliant and it's a pleasure to sit with them. But when you leave their presence, you're not empowered. You're not standing on your own. So a problem comes your way, the only thing you can do is call your teacher. Then there are teachers who teach students to be independent thinking. But the student sometimes wanders away and becomes his own thing and it's completely not aligned to the way the teacher, the understanding and the truth, the way the teacher really understood it. The chiddush is number 3, where the student becomes empowered with tools, methodology. The teacher taught the student methodology. So even when there's a new problem that comes up, the student can innovate. He has his own way of mind, but his mind has been trained and aligned to stick to the spirit or the ultimately the vision of, in this case, God, the Torah. And there's a risk. We could say, one second, if I want some independent thinking, maybe I don't agree with what God says. Okay, so that's the work we have to do, is to figure out how your ideas figure out how God's ideas become your ideas. That's when the timing of the master becomes your timing. So we all can understand these 3 levels. The question of how to achieve it is another story. But that these levels exist, that's the ultimate goal. Now, I'm sure we can apply this model to any community. You see how we train our children, how we train each other. We see in this community and other communities. Unfortunately, many like option 1. It's the simplest. Create a herd mentality. You have less trouble. People don't ask questions. Everybody's following a certain way. But between us, we all know that you're creating the biggest trouble, because that independence doesn't go away. You're silencing it. So what God wanted was an independent world. Be as independent as you could be, but then come to learn to align yourself to that higher thing. That's the ultimate what a chassid is, ultimate what a Jew is. So the Torah has very clear directives, and seemingly you can say it imposes itself upon us. But it's a way it's not imposing, because we have free will. And the goal is that you should use your free will to align yourself, not to be forced, ultimately. Now obviously a child of 2 years old, you don't ask a child 2 years old what your opinion is. But when you have a teenager, you want the teenager to own what you taught them, not just to do it because they're afraid of you. And to put it in very blunt, practical terms. You want them to own it. Owning it means they may not always do it exactly. Yeah, that's the risk. That's what an adult is. I speak about this to many people, counsel and so on, a lot of people, especially children of Bali Tshuva, who say to their parents, you know what, you chose that, now I don't have to follow your choices, I want the secular choice. And many very, very hurt by that, because they paid heavy prices so that their children and their family should be frugal. But the fact of the matter is that, not that they're making a correct point, but they have to learn to own it. They can't do it because you owned it. They have to learn to own it. And that's ultimately the way that something is permanent. I mentioned many times the Baal Shem Tov's line, which I think is just unbelievably cabinet. We say it every day, Shemoneh Esrei. What do we say? Elokeinu, Elokei Avosseinu, Elokei Avram Yitzchak V'Yaakov. Chronologically, it should go the other way. It was first Elokei Avram Yitzchak V'Yaakov, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then Elokei Avosseinu, then Elokeinu. She says no, because you have to worship God. It's your God, not worship the God of your parents. In chronological order, in Chinuch, obviously it begins, first it was God of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and they passed it on to their children, and our parents passed it on to us. But when you become an adult, you have to have Elokeinu. You have to own the God. You're not just worshiping a God that your parents worshipped. Think about that. It's an unbelievable line. But yes, you could say it opens up the Pandora's box, and okay, that means that people can ask questions. So, okay. God gave us minds, ask questions, and have right answers. Or know that life is a journey, you'll always have questions. We don't have to be afraid of questions. We have to know, to be wise and informed, and how to address it all. Anyway, that's a little elaboration on this topic. Yeah, so now we continue on. But bottom line, I wanted to say that this expresses the theme of Ayin Beis in the best possible way, because that's what Ayin Beis is. It starts with the Mamala Kalam. First we start with Er Pnimi, which is how it relates to us. Then we come to understand Er Sevav, transcendent beyond us. And then we relate how Er Sevav informs Er Pnimi, and how they become one. That even the Bli Gvul is informing the Gvul, and the Gvul becomes aligned with the Gvul of Elokus. We have a taste of it in the Beis HaMikdash. Mo Kamarim Einu Min Amida. And it's a mamish contradiction. Paradox, a walking paradox, a living paradox. You measured the Aron, it had to be certain measurements. If it wasn't those measurements that the Torah dictates, it's not a kosher Aron, it wouldn't be a Beis Mikdash, it wouldn't be a Holy of Holies. Then you measure from wall to wall, including that space, and it's as if the Aron doesn't exist. So the Rebbe actually brings in a letter the different Maimonic Siddur that explain it. So on one hand you can say, you know what? That the Gvul is on our perspective. The Bli Gvul is really the truth, and the Gvul therefore melts away when the Bli Gvul is there. Or you can come to realize, no, they're both true. All three are true. There's our Gvul, there's Bli Gvul, which doesn't reckon with Gvul, and then there's the third level that says, no, I want an Aron. The same God also wants an Aron with certain measurements. However, his measurements are the same as no measurements. Except we can't relate to that. We can only relate to measure. And we relate to God as Bli Gvul. Then you come to understand that the Bli Gvul of God and the Gvul of God are all one, and that's what's going on in the Kodesh Kodashim. Basically, finite meets infinite. Which we can understand intellectually, but emotionally, obviously, is far harder, because we are, at the end of the day, limited creatures. But I want to just say, remember what the Rebbe told Steinsaltz, and the Rebbe's approach in general, when he said to him, he went to see the Rebbe and he said he had a whole list of things to do. I wanted to know from the Rebbe how to prioritize and what to take away, because he simply, humanly, couldn't do it all. And the Rebbe looked at him and said to him, add more things. So you could think of the Rebbe being unrealistic? No. The Rebbe understood that the power of the Spirit is far greater than we had ever imagined. And it can work. So the idea of pushing ourselves more than we think is really understanding that your Gvul is not as Gvul as you think it is. It's really understanding that you could be a Keli for Bli Gvul. Now obviously this is not pure Bli Gvul, because at the end of the day we have 24 hours in the day. At the end of the day we have to sleep a little. We have to eat, we have things. That's not the question. The question is, what can you squeeze into the Gvul? There is ability, and you can see people who really are achievers, in one day they can achieve more than people do entire lifetimes. And relatively speaking, it's like Bli Gvul in Gvul. And then there are people with all the time in the world who don't do anything. So it's not so much what parameters we have, it's how you stretch those parameters and turn it into something. We all know, I mentioned this, infinity in the palm of your hand. Eternity in what's the expression there? Like, it says infinity in the palm, to see a world in a grain of sand. No, he has like this, to see a world in a grain of sand, heaven in a wild flower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. It's a beautiful poem. And I've talked about this many times. He lived at some 10 times the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov showed us that when you give tzedakah, you take in your palm of your hand, you reach out to help somebody. It's a penny. It's a moment. But you can change the entire existence with that one act. And he says actually, it's Yud Kei Vav Kei. The Yud is the penny, the coin. The Hey is your 5 fingers, Hey. The Vav is your outstretched arm, and the receiving hand of the pauper of the Ani is another Hey, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So we learn Yichud Zen Yitzchak to say in Tanya that one mitzvah changes the world. They have a mitzvah. You say the right word to a person, in the moment that he needs to hear it or she needs to hear it, you can change their life. This is called magical moments. So someone says, is this eternity or is it a moment? It's eternity in a moment. You've taken a moment and you turned it eternal. Now, from the Rebbe's point of view, we should be doing that every second. And he tried to do that every second. And we should be. We're lucky if we do it once a few times in our lives. Where you did the right thing, you know that you may have changed. It's not so much the pleasure you know you changed. The fact is you take one moment. Because at the end of the day, lives are changed in a moment. It doesn't take years to change your life. A moment happens. The birth of your child. You ever forget the moment your child was born? It's eternity. Till the last day, you remember it. And it's forever, lasts even later than you are.
But don't we say every mitzvah is eternal? So actually, when you do any mitzvah, it's
eternal. I'm just giving examples where we actually can see it.
Right.
100%. Absolutely, every mitzvah says releases an energy that's forever and ever. I just wanted examples that we should, with our physical eyes, can see it. And people have it. People will all say a magical moment. Now we believe you can initiate a magic. You don't have to wait for it to happen, randomly out of the blue. But that's the beauty. I'm trying to just give examples of where you could Bli Gvul and Gvul. Okay.
Yes. Can I ask a question?
Of course.
if a person was able to, a totally selfless person that only, we all know there's certain rare examples, but say we have a rare person that really that puts themselves completely aside, they don't care about themselves, whatever, their whole joy is giving to other people. You know, whether they're running a soup kitchen their whole life or taking care of their 12 kids and
Right.
never think of themselves. So my question to you would be, if a person were able to achieve that selfless level, that all that matters to them is to make God happy. That's it. And they really lived on that level. Doesn't matter what you have to do. Would the Rebbe say that shouldn't still be our exclusive thought, the shashui shel melech, the pleasure of the king, that's all you want? Or meaning that if you could actually attain that, should that be the exclusive kavanah, ratzon of how you live your life? Or should you also, as you said, like the combination of the second one, which is the combination of you using your own das, and you have some of your own pleasure? Or would we say one is the ultimate highest, if you could attain it, just do that exclusively?
I try to answer that. He doesn't really.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Which one?
That was my question.
You said how to get, one second, but you just asked about how. I thought he was asking about the why. The truth is, I went further than what he says here in this chapter. I think I acknowledge that. Because I'm trying to reconcile the two. Practically speaking, if you just learn Pshat here, right now he's just going to the level, for contrast purposes. David HaMelech focused on the songs for me, you know what it did for and real Torah is God's playing field, if you wish. God's playground, Shashuyim. And the Melech, that what he does on his own, it's his pleasures. And here the goal is in Aveda to come to a place where there's certain servant, all his pleasure is the pleasure of the king, whatever it may be. But I wanted to just jump ahead because I know the question, I have the question myself. I have no doubt that the end of the day is the combination of both. The question is how the combination, that's it. See, the combination can be, you know what, I have pleasure in the function of the mitzvah, as it affects. And then I come to realize that there's also the pleasure of God. That's not what the ultimate goal is. The ultimate goal is the other way around. You only your pleasure is only the pleasure of God. It doesn't matter what you're doing. But because God wants that there should be a difference between film and kashrus, so then that alone becomes your directive. You see, the difference would be, the first one is more that you have an independent, but you also realize that you have to be completely dedicated to God or give away your independence. What I'm saying now is that the gvul remains, but it's a new gvul. You're only doing the gvul. It would be like Pesach. It's simply God wants me to be Pesach, not because I feel it's Pesach today. So it's like the God's choice for distinction as opposed to your choice for distinctions. And yes, He wants you to do this and not that. And He'll say, you know what? I'm telling you now, I want you to go put on tefillin, and you're not chopping wood. So from your point of view, you could say, it doesn't matter to me which one. But since God makes a difference, then it's going to make a difference for me too. That would be the ultimate. Again, He doesn't say it specifically, but that's ultimately the Havana. It has to be that way.
Uh-huh. Yes.
It's like I said. Imagine we could see space of existence as space and non-space at the same time. As I said, we can't emotionally relate to that, but we can intellectually fantasize at least. The questions are great. This is good stuff.
But does the king want? So you're saying ultimately the king will want the
Jew
or the person to have pleasure on his own terms, or in addition to the pleasure that he derives from bringing pleasure to God.
It starts like
That's
this.
what you're saying?
No, I said like this. It starts on your own terms. Then you move on God's terms. Then you completely eliminate your terms and only God's terms. And then God's terms want your terms. So then you return to your terms because it's God's will, not because it's your terms. You see the difference? You don't see the difference? I mean, I give you many examples of it.
But if the person that says, my terms, you want me to have pleasure on my terms, God? Ultimately, I came to you, I give everything
Not ultimately,
to you. And
no,
God says,
no,
okay, you know what, I also want you to have pleasure on your terms. But if a person could come back and say, okay, God, you want pleasure on my term is to only give you pleasure. I come back to you. I have no interest at all.
Fine, that's fine. And then God says, and my pleasure is you go back to your terms. Exactly right. And God says, I want you to go back to your terms. You say, okay, that's what you want, then I'll do that too. That's the ultimate. What you just, did you see what I just said?
Yes, but you're saying ultimately the God is going to force him to want, say.
But then it's not your terms.
No,
It's God's terms that happen to be your terms. It's not your terms. The difference would be is the first one, with your terms, then you're going to decide when it's your terms, when it's not. The last one will be God will decide, but it's going to be your pleasure too. But that can only come after you first refine yourself. Look, it's like sending a. It's like let's talk about the love or teaching. You teach a student. In the beginning, the student is dependent on the teacher. Then you tell the student, listen, I'm not going to solve your problems now. You have to go find a way to solve your own problems. Use the methodology I taught you. Now the student will make mistakes. You listening?
Yeah, listen.
The student is now on the student's terms. The student now will make mistakes, and the teacher says, but I want you to figure it out on your own. Then the student gets wiser and wiser and starts realizing the methodologies he taught me. And the student gets better and better to a point that every solution he comes to is exactly what the teacher would have done. But he's figured out how to do it on his own. Then he comes back to the teacher and says, you know what? I'm yours. I'm doing it the way you want me to do. And he realizes that his own terms is the teacher's terms. And then the teacher says, exactly right. I want you now to use your intelligence, but your intelligence is an extension of mine, and you've come to realize that. But you can only come to that if you have the bechira where you make a mistake. That's the key. Look, it goes down to the same thing. First day, second day, third day of creation. In the first day, unity reigned. That's why it says Yom Echad. It was light. Light. It was only unity. There was no second entity. Day 2, duality was created. Machlokes. God separated the higher waters from the lower waters. It doesn't say Ki Toiv in day 2. Why? Because now there's diversity. Diversity can lead to divisiveness. And that can be called Toiv Begili. Comes day 3, and it says 2 days Toiv. Why? Because day 3 is peace. Tiferes. Peace between Chesed and Gvura, peace between the two psukim that contradict each other. What does day 3 show? Day 3 shows that even though there were two, they could have conflicted, they could have gone to war. Day 3 comes and shows, no, blue and red and blue and white, blue and red, I can combine into beautiful music, into beautiful painting. Beauty is harmony within diversity, but that harmony can only be after you have independence, or else there's no diversity. So the diversity that we have is so-called our terms, and the harmony we create. You and I are different. But then we can do two things. We can go to war, God forbid. Or you and I, you say, you have a certain way of thinking, I have a certain way. Let's align, complement each other, and build an unbelievable force that changes the world, brings citizens to the world. That's the goal. But that's only if we have our own terms that can happen. Because if you and I are clones, and we're both only doing what God wants perfectly, then there's no diversity. That's the key. And then when we align it and we do it with harmony, then God can say, you know what? It was your terms and my terms. So it began your terms with possible mistakes and possible errors and so on. The ultimate goal is to understand that the reason God wanted the whole thing because He wanted the harmony. It's not that He wanted the diversity, He wanted the harmony. But real harmony wants the harmony through diversity. So you'll ask the question, does God want the details or does He not want the details? That's what I'm saying to you. It's Gvul, it's the artist, Bli Gvul artist who wants a Gvul expression. Mokum Ha'aron, Eina Min Amida. He wants the Eina Min Amida to be in Mokum. He wants beyond space and space. He wants beyond time and time. He wants the mitzvah eternal, but He wants it not in heaven. The mitzvah to create eternity is down here. The Shamas above can't do eternity. Even though they have eternal life, but we create an eternity because we take a physical thing and we can make it forever. Okay, so now we go back. So this is Chayes. So his Chayes, God's pleasure becomes His pleasure. The Master's pleasure becomes, that's a mitzvah. V'yashlema, now he's going back to David HaMelech. V'yashlema, then we could say, the Kamoyken Gam B'Teira, the same thing we could say is B'Teira. The Ima Yesha Ein V'Asiyah B'Pel Rag B'Chinas Yediyah V'Asogya, even though it's not like mitzvahs, which was an action, an actual action, it's only in Torah, it's only knowledge, knowing and understanding, comprehending. Had Yediyah Satera, he for mitzvah. But Yediyah Satera, knowing Torah is also, it itself is a mitzvah. As he says, Nageres HaKedesh and Kuntus Sachin, in the end of Tanya, he says, "L'hava mashkot b'priyas." So there he brings that knowing Torah is also a mitzvah. As a matter of fact, he says it's one of the greatest mitzvahs. Rama v'nosa gova moed. The mitzvah to know God and know God's entire cosmic order. Al ken yochel is b'zeh b'chinas hatayim v'ha'atzim b'chinas shashua mel b'atmusha shemisani gimatayim. That's why there can be in Torah a pleasure, atzmi, a core pleasure, the same way that God has pleasure in the Torah. Shemisani gimatayim, that God has pleasure in the Torah. In other words, he's qualifying but also explaining. He went to explain the whole thing. He said, how could you have an argument to, how could you have a complaint to David HaMelech? Why he focused not on the pleasure that he had in Torah, or the pleasure that relates to existence, and the pleasure to God's pleasure. It's God's pleasure. Huh? So that was his question. How could David be punished? It's God's pleasure. So he answered, we see in mitzvahs there's a way, a dedication that you're focusing not on the mitzvah's function in your life, but on the mitzvah as being just God's pleasure. He says, Yeshlem, you could say the same thing with Torah. That you can also relate to Torah. Torah is not an action. So an action, you could say the servant is doing whatever God wants him to do. And because the master has pleasure, he has pleasure, even though he doesn't understand it. And therefore it also refines his skills. But Torah is knowledge. It's not action. So he says, no, Torah is also action. It's a mitzvah. It's also a mitzvah. It's not less than other mitzvahs. So there too, you can have the same type of dedication while you're learning and understanding. That's what he's trying to say here. It says Yeshlem. The reason it's a chidush, I believe, for two reasons. First of all, Torah is not a maisa. So a servant doesn't have to understand the master. The master says, go chop wood, go chop wood. Go put on film, put on film. Torah needs intelligence. You know, we're not just talking about reading words. We're talking about the mitzvah of learning Torah. So that's one distinction. The second distinction you can say is that Torah is al pi tamadas. Mitzvahs he doesn't understand. The servant doesn't have to understand what the king's, the master's intentions. But Torah you are understanding. So that's why it's a chiddush that nevertheless Torah, even though it's understanding and it's not an action oriented, you can also, because it's also a mitzvah. In other words, if Torah was God saying, you know what, you have 613 mitzvahs, then I'm giving you also learn Torah to understand because I want you to use your mind. But no, it's also a mitzvah. Learning Torah is also a mitzvah. So you also have the two options. You can learn because you like learning and you like the intelligence, what it does for you. You can learn because it's God's pleasure, and I want to have pleasure that God has pleasure. It's a beautiful chiddush, actually. It's not so easy, actually. It's far easier in action. It's far easier in action because action. Hey, I understand what tefillin is. Why this animal hide is a mitzvah? Well, no, God wants it. Fine. But the Torah, you're actually enjoying it. Right now, we're learning Chassidus here. Hopefully, we're enjoying it. To say that, you know what, it's not our joy, it's a divine joy. That's why David HaMelech was not so easy, because he was learning Torah, and he gave a shmach. He said, look what Torah is, it's beautiful. No, he forgot that besides the joy, it's God's pleasure too. It's not just your pleasure. That's just to show you how difficult it was. That's why David, it wasn't a small mistake he made. It was a major. How are you supposed to do that? He's learning it. He's enjoying it. It's helping him deal with his enemies, and he's still telling him. That's why. But the whole point is not to criticize David. The point is that the whole thing happened. That David actually, you can thank David because David revealed to us the higher dimension of Torah. Because had this not happened, we'd never know. So by David calling it Zmiris, we learn number one that it's Zmiris. We also learn that it's more than that. So you can even actually thank David because of him we learn that there is a deeper dimension. At the end of the day, that's how we have to look at it. Okay. The Yesh Shleimer, it's interesting he says Yesh Shleimer because I was looking at all the Maimorim that discuss this. That the Yesh Shleimer is because he brings mitzvahs. The other Maimorim do not bring this marshal of mitzvahs. That's the Yesh Shleimer because the mitzvahs, it's easy to understand how your timing is the timing of the Adon, of the master. The Chiddush here is that he's applying that same idea to Torah. Yeah. You know what that means? So, always has this question. If you learn Torah in Kabbalah, or you learn Torah because you actually enjoy and you're a smart person learning Torah, understanding it, who's going to understand Torah better at the end of the day? So initial intuitive an answer would be the one who's learning with intelligence. Because Kabbalah said, I'm learning it because God wants me to learn. I understand, I don't understand, who really cares? And even if I understand, there's so much more to understand, there's so many people that know better than me. But the answer is not that way. Because if you're learning Kabbalah sales, you're going to keep learning because God wants you to understand it. So you're not going to just learn as much as you want to understand. You're going to learn, keep going deeper and deeper. The one who's learning because he understands it is going to stop once he understands it. Once you understand it, I satisfied myself and that's it. So Kabbalah sale and ends up being can actually be the thing that causes you to go further than your own mind would have gone. See the twist there? Yeah, that's where that's the chushim. So even you'll learn Torah, you'll learn as much as gives you geschmack. Why should you go further? But the Kabbalah sale pushes you to go further and exert yourself even more, and you can actually become more wiser that way. Now imagine a person who has exactly a ben shenasa eved, a ben that nasa like the fundamental piece, and I am Samachvav is based on that. A ben who has seichel and he forces himself to be about Kabbalah sale, so his exertion will bring him to far deeper understanding than he would have had he just learned. So I think of it like he brings the example of someone above, a person who has to paskin a shaila. So if he doesn't have to paskin, he doesn't have that need. I have to give you an advice. I have to go far deeper. If I just have to say a drasha, a purple, has no application to someone's life. But if I have to tell you, is this allowed or not allowed, I have to go far deeper. So the exertion of that Kabbalah sales causes you to go reach deeper in the seichel of it. Ayin Beis, interestingly, I would say is the other way around. It's the Evet Shenasa Ben. What's it? Evet Shenasa Ben, Ben Shenasa Ben. I'm sorry. In Samavov, it's Evet Shenasa Ben. Even an Evet also has to have the quality of understanding. Here is more the Ben Shenasa. Yeah, because here
Ben, go ahead. So Ayin Beis is the other way.
It's not the other.
I'm confusing myself now.
Mhm.
Huh?
It's always the other way around.
No, what?
The council drove him to
Which one?
have to be
The
exactly.
Ben Shenasa Evet and Ben Shenasa
I
Ben.
thought that was.
No, that's not what was Ben Shenasa. Let's put some of Vav talks about Avodah B'Koyach Atzmei, the power of that Avodah B'Koyach Atzmei of self. Here he talks a lot more about Torah. That's more like Tefillah, Torah, the Yichud, the unity, the Ben. The Ben becomes an Eved also. It's Eved Shenasa.
So
Okay. So he
which,
says also Torah. What?
so Samachvav is an important line. It's a major
No,
line.
I think I've said it in the past, and for some reason I'm confusing myself right now. Samach Vav is probably Evet Shenasa Ben, and Ayin Beis is Ben Shenasa Evet. Or is it the other way around?
I think so.
Other way around? Yeah? Some of them is Ben Shenasa Evet.
The Rav Passos.
You're probably right. Yeah.
What?
It's just not
Ben, so
confusing.
Samachvav is the other
Ben
way.
Shenasa Evet. That the point there is to become an Evet, to lose your Giluyim and become completely dedicated to the above. You're correct. That's
So-
correct.
So Samachvav is Ben Shenasa Evet.
And here, Evet Shenasa Ben. Here, to take your this and become like a Ben. And connect to Torah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I correct myself. Evet Shenasa Ben. After you finish Samach Vav, and it's like, basically, Ben Shenasa Evet is that it's not just on my terms, but I become an Evet, level 2. Samach Vav is going from 1 to 2.
Right.
And Ayin Beis is going from 2 to 3.
Oh wow, that's great. Samachvav is going from 1 to 2.
So you go from Ben, from your Giluyim, I'm a Ben, I'm close to the king.
1 to 2.
But then I go and I work hard and I realize there's something beyond through Avodah.
That's your concept.
Right. And Ayin Beis goes, now that you learn that you're a Ben, you go further
Yes.
beyond yourself, Now you got to bring it back.
To be in a band, to give love to God.
Right.
A band is only, a true band is wants to
Right.
love.
But it's an Eved now that's becoming a Ben. So you already have the Kabbalah, so now you can bring it back through Torah into your existence. And that's the Tainug. So this piece is very fundamental because in some of what we also talks about how the Tainug Adam becomes the Tainug Eved. I have to look it up. But I'm almost sure there's the opposite. There the Ben is becoming an Eved. So the Eved, say there, it's about the Bin. Here he's also talking how it informs you in return. How the Tainug informs you. In other words, it infuses your Torah. Okay. ויש להם את כמו כן בכנסת הזה. על כן יוכל לבזר, תתן גז בכנסת ששור מלך בעצמו שבסנגים מהתאר. By the way, some of the Mamorim of Simchus Torah talk about this theme, and that's what Simchus Torah is. You dance with the Torah not as the seichel that you're enjoying, you're dancing in it because it's God's pleasure.
Right, you're just the legs for the Torah.
Exactly. But God wants you also to have, so then that's what Simchus Torah, the timey Torah. We learned about time in the Kudus time, the pleasure of Torah. That's what Simchus Torah is. That's why you dance with it without not learning it. Yesh leim shezei gimel shoyis adashem shakadosh baruch esuk b'teira. Yesh leim, and then this is what it says. These are the 3 hours, the first 3 hours that Hashem, the Gemara says that Hashem, the first 3 hours of the day, what does he do? He's esuk b'teira. He's exerting himself in Teira. Shel b'chinas hamshachim mitzad atzmi. This is hamshachim mitzad atzmi. So the question my Morim ask, doesn't it say, I'm going to read in a minute, the kol ha-keira b'teira, the kol ha-keira v'sheina b'teira, kosh baruch ha-sheishiv v'sheina keira v'sheina kenegdei. It says clearly that when anyone who sits and reads and studies Torah, God responds by reading and studying Torah with you. So the Maimorim ask a question, how does it correspond with this Gemara that says the first 3 hours he studied? There, any time of the day, any place, as soon as you study, God responds and studies. Here it's saying only the first 3 hours. And the first 3 hours, even if no one's doing it. There the condition is only if you're doing it. So therefore there's definitely 2 different levels of Torah. That's what he's going to say now. It's taken from those Maimorim. It's Lamon Ma'ila B'masha Kol HaTeira Kol HaKeira Kosh Baruch Yeshiv Esek. Shezeh Masha B'Sus L'Tata B'Sus L'Eila. The Gemara is talking about Hamshach Mitzad Atzmei. That's talking about God's pleasure. What is the first 3 hours? That's when God is indulging, so to speak, in Torah on His terms. The Kol HaKeira V'Sheina is on our terms. When we're learning, God responds. That's Asus L'Tata Asus L'Eila. That through our awakening, this affects God. That's already the Torah on the lower level. So when it says that when you learn, God learns corresponding, that's God, that's Torah on your terms. But if you want Torah on God's terms, that's what the Gemara is saying. The first 3 hours is he learns. Yeah. Now he asks, and even Torah in general, but isn't Torah in general a transmission from above? Meaning, even when we initiate, when we learn, Hashem responds. Isn't that also Hamshach U'Mayla? As it's known, the difference between study and prayer. The tefillah b'chinas ha'lo u'matlu. Prayer is an elevation from below upward. Which means that the awakening from below causes an awakening from above. The Torah b'chinas hamshach u'mayla l'mata, shezeh asus leil mitzad. And Torah is a transmission from above downward, which is an awakening on its own. It's a question on the table here. So how could you say there's 2 levels? The whole Torah is Hamshach compared to Tefillah. It says Mekal Mokim. Nevertheless, the Torah Gufa, and Torah itself, Mashakadosh Baruch Hu Keir V'Shein Kenegdei, that which a Torah reads and studies, Kenegdei, correspond, Kenegdei means across you. In response to your learning, so in other words, he's basically qualified in saying it's true. General Torah is from above down, Tefillah is below. But in Torah itself, there's 2 levels. There's Torah that's also coming from above, but it's responding to you. There is such a level. The Gimel Shalosh L'Shenis, and the 3 first hours of the day, Shakadosh Baruch Hu Yeshiv V'Esed B'Teinu, Hamshach Hashem Mitzad Atzmei. That's when God's studying. That's Hamshach Mitzad Atzmei. So basically, he's explained that even in Hamshach from above, there's 2 ways. One that you inspire it, and one that it comes from above on its own. It's not a question and answer. So he's just qualifying to understand that in Torah itself. This is very vital. This is a very vital piece because this is the whole interface Is it coming from below? Is it coming from above? And so on.
When are those first 3 hours? Or what are those?
I think it's in the 30 hours of the morning.
It's not after Chatzot?
It says like this: Yom Yitzava, U'Balayla Shira Imei. Yom Yitzava Esei, U'Balayla Shira Imei. So the expression is Yom Yitzava. I think it's the dawn hours. One second, let me just remind myself.
Maybe we should start earlier.
That's what I was saying. And how do you become a vessel for this unique Torah that God's only on His
Hold on,
own?
the first 3 hours, the Gemara Brachas. It's right in the beginning of Brachas. Or Davov, something like that. Gimel Shalosh Hashemis. Huh? Is it right after Chatzos?
Yeah, I would think it'd be a Chatzot because that's what Tikkun Chatzot would be, maybe a vessel for.
That's Balayla Shira Yom Yitzava Esei. I have to.
What do you say?
So we learned before Balayla Shira Imei. That's the 3 levels. It may be. I have to look up. It's 3 hours.
And how
Gemara,
do
you can bring me a Gemara, but it's very, very big. It's a very huge.
how do you receive that though?
You receive this by the bittul. Like some chasteri you receive.
No, but if a person wanted to receive this on a daily basis and try to align himself with this unique Torah.
Well, it's not just the time.
It's
not just the time period. It means this would be required a type of taking simchas Torah. We're taking pleasure in God's pleasure of the Torah.
Yes, but this is happening every day.
That's what we learn now. One second, we didn't finish. We're getting
try to
there.
receive it at 3 hours.
One second, we're in the middle of the talking. 1 second. The Zera Torah Kameshi Begimel Hashem is the Atik. And this is the Torah the way it's in the first 3. Begimel Hashem means the first 3 levels of Atik. Ubashasha Begimel Hashem is the Odom Kadma. This is the Torah the way it's the 3 levels of Atik, first 3 levels of Atik, and the root is the 3 levels of Ak. So this is Pnimius Ak actually, basically, in other words. The Yesh B'china Zu Gam Be'esek HaTorah Shebekol. Here he goes. He's going to say now how. There's this because there's this level also in the study and exertion in Torah Shebekol Echad Echad. In everyone. They have bittul be'etzem b'chinas atzmus ein sof. Through when we have a core type of selflessness. I say before bittul.
Yes.
Core subjugation, core
Self-effacing.
yeah, suspension of self, a core bittul, a core selflessness, because it's atzmus ein sof, and atzmus ein sof, shemisanig be'esik teros b'chinas hataynu shalamayla. That his pleasure in studying Torah, his Torah, is the pleasure, is in God's pleasure. So it's not about his understanding, it's in God's pleasure. That's so especially the first level of Torah, Kol HaKoreh, is no matter how you learn Torah. Sit down and learn, even if you learn it just on a very
On your own terms.
Yeah, on your own terms, also God responds. That's the other level. But if you want this level, it's through the bittul. U'madrega zu b'Torah hu sha'Torah nikra b'shem matana. And this level of Torah is a Torah that's called the name of gift. Called the gift of matana. Din Yidua, because it's known Lupam Nikra Torah b'Shem Yerusha. It's known sometimes the Torah is called the name Yerusha, inheritance. But Kamesha Kosu Torah Tzivalon Moshe Merosha. Like it says Torah Merosha. Torah that God gave us is Merosha, is an inheritance. Upamim Razal, and at times Razal say Hasken Atzmacha Lil Metera She'eni Yerusha L'cha. Prepare yourself to learn Torah because it's not your inheritance.
Where's that Maimon Zal?
It's Gemara. I'm not sure where. Well, Paimim Nikla B'Shem Matana, and sometimes the Torah is called as a gift. So we see here 3 things. Torah is inheritance. Sometimes it's not asking your effort, and then sometimes a gift. So is it an inheritance? Is it your effort, or is it a gift? Answer is 3 levels of Torah. Like we say when we make the blessing on Torah. You gave us Torah Samas. Nosan is a matan. Asher Nesan HaTorah, right? Ata Emes. Nesan HaTorah. Asher Nosan Lom Torah Samas. Nesan HaTorah. So you see the word Nesan, Nesina, which is a gift. V'nikra Matan Torah. What is Matanim? Again, gift of Torah. Matan is a matan. So he answers like this. The Inyan Hasken Atzmacha. The idea of preparing yourself, that's the Kol HaKoreh of V'Shem L'Risa. That Hasken is the level that you do through your Yigiyah, your effort. So awakening below creates an awakening from above. The Inyan HaYerusha, the Yerushan Torah inheritance, the Torah. That's through the Berudim of Torah. the refinements in Torah. There's a yeshiv eretz the Torah. That when you struggle in Torah, what happens? You inherit. This is the inheritance that comes through the refinements. You inherit what? The energies of Torah that's got scattered and are all over the place. That's the Yerusha in Torah. He's very brief here. That's the Yerusha. So Yerusha is something that you work on, but what you're inheriting is more than your efforts. You're inheriting something that was not yours. You get it as virtue of your inheritance. So the first one you get through yours, that's your effort. The second one is you're getting it, but it's getting something more than your effort because you're getting something that's coming from Torah, from a different world. This is something that is a complete gift. See, Yerusha also says in places is because you're a son. Matan is a gift. This is the awakening from above on its own. This is the inner dimension of Torah, the core pleasures, the core play things, the core pleasures. So we have three things. Till now I was talking about two, but it's fine, I was talking about three things. So you have mamash, what you do through your effort, completely your effort. Yerusha is due to your virtue of your birthright. You get something that's beyond your effort. Matana is completely from above, but he's qualifying even matana. However, even a gift, you don't give except to someone that's worthy. You don't give a gift to everybody. They have bitl atzmi. So the gift is given through the bitl atzmi. This gift is given when a person has that bitl atzmi, complete core selflessness. They put themselves completely aside and completely to the divine. That bitl is a keli that brings the matana down. Why is it matana then? Because it's not something that you really get on your own. You're just making a keli for it. The first one is you learn asus l'tata, so it reaches a level of Torah that's commensurate to you, and it brings it. Here you're getting something that's not on your level. It's God's pleasures, but your bitl allows you to get it. So the baton is giving to someone who has created something to be able to receive. See the difference? This goes back to what we said before. We're not talking here. Even the bitl of Sevilkam of Bligvul has to come to something that is receiving it. It doesn't just come on its own. So in the interface, you need to have someone there. A God has pleasure in Torah, is we know that. The question is whether you have any benefit from it.
And then number two.
And the answer here is yes, you do have benefit. That's why David was punished.
Mm-hmm. Then number two, there's a shashuing atzmi.
Benefit doesn't mean that it's in your terms. Benefit means that you can appreciate it.
People have to earn getting a gift. I mean, when a person gets the soul of a tzaddik, they haven't earned that gift. It was just given to them whether they've done something
It's
or
not
not.
correct. Which is when Tanya says the opposite. Because you work very hard, that's why you
So in other words, you're not
work.
born with the soul of a tzaddik? In other words, I thought a soul of a tzaddik was different than a soul of a baby, for instance.
First of all, that's not somebody getting a soul of a tzaddik. That's someone born. That's a different story altogether. I thought you were talking about somebody in midlife. That comes only through work.
Right, but I thought, so you can become a tzaddik?
Hold on, what are you saying right now? What are you asking?
Okay.
Born or not born?
I thought a soul of a tzaddik was a different kind of soul than a non-tzaddik.
Yeah.
So at the time that someone is born, if they're given, they're either given the soul of a tzaddik, which is very rare, or they don't get a soul of a tzaddik, and it's a difference between becoming a Beinoni or becoming a tzaddik. And that at the time they're given the soul of a tzaddik, that person hasn't done anything. It's a gift. You said a gift has to be earned. I
First of all,
thought a gift could just be given whether it's earned or not.
First of all, he's not talking here about tzaddik.
Mm-hmm.
He's speaking about a particular level of Torah. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Different question. Who says that's a gift? Who called that a gift? Being born a tzaddik, where does it say it's a gift? Maybe it's not called a gift. It's the way it is. God just makes choices. He says certain neshama is down that way. In Tanya, he says there's a gift given to someone who worked hard. Middle of life, a baby can receive the neshama of itself. That is a gift, but that's a gift through a lot of work.
There's some people, they do two
But
people
born
do
is not a
exactly
gift,
the same
but-
work, and one may become a tzaddik and one may not. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. Who knows? I don't know. But it's not a question here because that gift is also given only because of being earned. You're saying someone may work hard, they may not get the gift. That's another story. But the one who got the gift worked hard.
I'm saying the two people can work just as hard as each other.
That's a different
One may
discussion.
get it, one may not.
Yeah, but the one who got it didn't get it just as a gift. He got it because he worked hard. The other one, maybe there's a reason why the other one didn't get it. The bottom line is you can't get a gift just without any effort at all. This type of gifts that we're talking about.
That second line is that Shashuim Atzmi, where it says B'inyan
Atzmi,
Matana. Yeah, that's these essential pleasures are. We're talking about God or our
God's.
God's pleasures.
The pasuk is v'eyesh ashrim lefanav.
God's pleasures.
The gam habit la'atzmu b'chinas hamshachel mumayla. Because also the bit la'atzmi is hamshachel mumayla. It's not that you're okay. Because also the bit latzmi is amshachim amayla. Why? Because it's not that the first level where you're learning and you're getting Torah on your level. You're getting the higher level, so it's amshachim amayla. So it's only that you are earning the right to be able to partake from that pleasure. That's what he's basically saying. Unless he means the bitl itself is amshachim amayla. That itself is a gift. The Yishash is bitl. I'm not sure. You could say that too, that the bitl itself is amshachim amayla. Itself is a gift. Right? There's emagil of chinas tal teira, and through this you reach the tal teira. Because in teira there's also tal and motar. Right? Motar is rain. That falls the aid through our efforts, through work. That's the first level he talked about. Tal teira is b'chinas shashim atzmi. Tal is the dew that falls on its own. In the morning there's a dew. That's the tal teira that comes from there. The oz who the etzim l'maylam l'kol b'chinas chayz ve'enik sheve'elim. And then it's higher fundamentally than all levels of vitality and pleasure in this world. And it's an example, mamish, of how the pleasure is above. So these has this bit latzmi, his pleasure in learning Torah is mamish like it is above.
So these shashuim atzmi that we just said in this line is now talking about our essential pleasure.
It's always God's pleasure. The question is whether we have that pleasure or we have our own pleasure.
Right. But somebody can access it. Someone who's totally bittul can access that.
Yeah.
Lebanon oil.
Should we finish the mimer? Okay, I'll finish the mimer. I'll try to finish it. This last piece, I just should add, is all based on the mimer of Torah Tziva. The Alter Rebbe said in Tov Kuf Samach Zayin. Except there, he begins with this whole discussion of the three levels in Torah. Through your work, through Yerusha or Matana, and then goes into David and Tal and Motar.
It's in Likutei Torah?
That's not Likutei Torah.
It's in the Sefer Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe?
Yeah, Tov Kuf Samach Zayin. It's a lot of Torah tziburs.
Samach Zayin, you said. Tzadik Zayin.
Tov Kuf Samach Zayin. Samach.
I got you.
It's interesting how he goes about it. He goes the other way around. So now he concludes the mimer, 43. Now, according to the above, we'll understand what it says. that God, that Moshe was Chanan, he beseeched, prostrated himself, or beseeched God. Avrona, let me cross. Please allow me to cross. The Eretz Ha'eretz, and to see the land. The question that he asked in the beginning of the Maimah was, what's this thing of seeing the land? What's he seeing? So he explains that this request, was what he desired, Moshe desired Liflil, to affect the close of Shomas Yisrael, the general souls of Israel. He wanted to bring into them, infuse into them this Hamshacha from above downward. In other words, what we're speaking about until now, this Matana. Shacham Ma'al Lamata. Torah. That means Avrana. What's the word Avra? Avra means
To cross over.
yeah, cross me over. But no, Avra, you should lead me over. So it means it's going not on him doing it, it goes on the Eberstein. Avra no, please cross me over. That's what it means. No?
Avra, I thought was first person in the future, not a causative.
No, you're right. Avra goes on Moshe saying, Avra no, please, but what is? But he's explaining. It's not Avra no. Please, you allow me to cross over. That's what I mean.
That's from the new.
Avra no, please cross me over. But Eretz I shall see the land. So it means he's asking God to cross him over. He can't do it on his own. He's asking God to do it, which means Hamshachah Ma'ala. That's an awakening from above. The Ze'in Hariyah, and that's also the in of Riyah, to see the land. To see. Shehi Hamshachah Mamayla Lamata. Mamayla Lamata Kaneda. As it's known, to see is a transmission from above downward. The Gamriya Meir ala Bitla Atzmi. And Riyah also indicates on this core bitla, on this core selflessness. That Riyah hi Mekorev. Because seeing something is always from close up. Because Mekorev in Shaykhin Hatshuka. And when you're close up, you can't have a yearning. You see something, it's no possible. Yearning is from a distance. The kol ratzon b'tshuka shaykh hakashum medochik. Any desire and yearning is only possible when you're from a distance. Not when you're standing close up. Like someone who stands before the king, he can't say, it's not possible that he's running toward the king. So then what is Riyah? It cannot be the yearning or the running or the desire. It's the bittul. So Riyah indicates bittul. That the bittul, while you're in the presence of the king, to be completely nullified, completely selfless in his presence. Right. That's what we're saying. In your core personality. And that's what it means that Moshe said, and I will see, Shemeid al Bezen Yan, indicates on two things. On the transmission from above downward means something that's coming from above, not something that's through our effort. And the second thing on the total nullification, that he's a container to it. So not just on the bittul, it also indicates on the revelation, the error, to see. Moshe himself was on this level. Like it says, "V'nochnu ma," we shall rest. Ma, what's ma? Is bittul, ma from like ma, nothingness, because he was in a state of selflessness. And Atzmas Ein Sof radiated, illuminated in him in a revealed way. It says by Moshe v'yad reishislei. Not sure what it's referring to. V'yad reishislei.
Bracha?
Huh?
That's the bracha? Is it by God? Yad Reishislei?
Maybe.
It's in Vayechi.
But at the level of Riyah. Because he was on this level, that's why he was able to affect this in all the general souls of Israel. So there, let me just go back to the questions a second. She says, "V'schana Hashem, ata hachalesa laharis es avdecha es gadolcha." She asked the question, what do you need that introduction? Why do you have to say, you prepare for me, or ata hachalesa, to show your servant? Why do you need that introduction? So now he's explaining. So that's the thing. He says, ata hachalesa laharis es avdecha v'ya shizahi madregas Moshe. You prepared to show this to your servant. This is the riyah that was the haris. That was the level of Moshe. So he says, what's in atachalesa? What's atachalesa? You prepared. Hu in vani hamasla. The Matan Torah omad ubatul hagzera vani hamasla v'yered Hashem ha'asinai. Atachalesa, he's invoking that which happened by Matan Torah, where it says ani hamasla. God said, I will begin. By Matan Torah, God began by standing and by eliminating the gzera, the decree, and the split. How? Between higher and lower, creating the interface, Matan Torah. Ani Amaskal. He began by saying, God descended on Hasina. So we see here again, Atachales is referring to Amshachad from above. The Matan Torah because Matan Torah was on a transmission from above. And that's what he says afterwards also, that you'll show me your gadlucha, your greatness, and your strong arm. This is all the intensity of Atzmus that it was in a state of transmission below. Ashemi yasik meisecha k'vuresecha, and then it continues, says, because who can do like your actions, who can like your strengths, who in half flash is that Atzmus. Why is he adding that? Because he's showing the haflah, the grandeur of it all. Something grander, wondrous, very wondrous, because it's Hamshachas Ha'atzmus here. So he's saying no one can do like your actions and like your strengths. The Imi Yeshamudal Berach Ma'elim is, even though Atzmus is moved, is separated and detached from relatively from the in quality from the world. Nevertheless, he's being drawn down. Nevertheless, he's drawing himself down. This is only in the power of Atzmus, because Atzmus is beyond. How could he come down? That's only in his power. And that's what Moses wanted to affect in the general souls. That's also why he said, why do you have to, you could just say Laharis. Why does he have to focus, show your servant? Because B'derech Shifus, it says Bittul. He's standing in a state of fundamental core selflessness, subjugation, in a state of a servant. Canal, like we learned in the earlier chapters, standing in a state of a servant, that's the Keli from Shachas Atzmus, the servant to the master. Now, if this prayer of Moshe was fulfilled, and Moshe was the one that would lead them into the land of Israel, there would have been no shinuyim. There could never be changes, and there would never have been a destruction of the temple. And there would have been a revelation to all the Jews equally. Because when the transmission is from above, there's no distinction of levels. As it will be in the future. This also explains what it says V'schan al Hashem. Like Rashi says, Schana, I beseech you. He's asking him, give me a matnas chinam, a free gift, even if I haven't earned it. The same thing it says in Medrash Rabbah here. Moses is saying to Hashem, I'm asking you for a free gift. Because as we learned before, as we said earlier, this level of Torah is in a state of gift. That's why he's asking for a gift. The Kol Zeh, but all of this was not for himself, because he's already in that level. This was for the purpose of Israel, not for himself. Like it says in Medrash, Yalkut, on the pasuk Tefillah Mesha, Amalek Kosh Baruch Hu Ma'atem Avakish. God says to Moshe, what are you asking? What are you requesting? Amalek, he answers, Einem Avakish Bishvili. I'm not asking for myself. El Bishvili Yisrael. I'm asking for them, for the Israel. Sheyeh B'chinas Hamshach Hanal, that they should have this transmission. above mentioned transmission. And this is his appeal to God for a free gift. You who prepared Davani Amasu, because you began it all. That's the transmission from above below from Matan Torah. Avrana, please pass me over, carry me over. Ve'era, and let me see. Like you said, this is all from above. To affect this transmission in general souls of Israel. Moshe, because he himself was on this level, this was in his capacity, his ability. This was his entire request, to affect this transmission from above down in general souls of Israel. This level of Torah, Shashri, Musa. That's what he wants. That's Veschana.
Zohar.
Kitzer, summary.
The
So we have to understand, being that this is only the Shashri Amel, this is only God's domain, his pleasures, the pleasures of God, of the king. Why was King David punished on this? So to explain this, Yagdim preface, that there's a mitzvah, is the intention of the mitzvah, is that the bittul, the subjugation, and the amshach, the transmission, is in revealing the divine desire. That's like in a specific function. And the second thing is, the mitzvah of the servant of the servitude of a servant, that the bittul, not just to the desire, but to the one who desires, the owner of the desire, the source. And he has this joy that he feels fulfilling the higher, the supernal desire, and is causing pleasure above. And higher than this is that the joy is from the Nachas Ruach above. That's the third level. And Pnimius, he's saying, not just higher, but in real Pnimius is that the joy and the pleasure above is his joy and pleasure. That means that it's not at all his pleasure on his own. On his terms, it's completely the pleasure on terms of above. And the joy is the actual mitzvah, not just in its bechein, its outcome. Even though he doesn't comprehend the servant. What is the mitzvah and the pleasure in it? He doesn't comprehend its dimensions, its depth. No, that's not the song. Even though he doesn't understand and appreciate the depth of this mitzvah and pleasure. And so how does he get to it? He gets to it through bittul. This comes from his total selflessness and placing himself aside, his whole essence aside. Like a servant who perfects and diligently that he refines in the Yefei Malach and the beauty and the perfection of the work.
Beautifies.
The beauty of the work. Beautifies. Yeah, it beautifies. Because of the pleasure. What? Tiny shalom. But it's not his own pleasure, it's the pleasure of the servant, of the master. Yeshleim, here it says again, Yeshleim. You could say the Kamei Kem B'Teira, Atayni B'Shashri HaMelech. The same thing as in Teira, the pleasure in the Shashri HaMelech, in the pleasures of the king. Yeshleim, Shazayin, Gimel Shemus, Shoyis, Harashem, Yeshe, B'Esek B'Teira. These are the first 3 hours that God sits and exerts in Teira. And that's the Teira that's in the state of gift. And with this we'll understand, Eschan is a free gift. That you show, you reveal to your servant, a servant as in bitl atzmi, a total bit.
But it wasn't granted to him, his request, because you have to say that because the Klal wasn't on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu.
He doesn't say why. Yeah, you could say that. You could say that that's the work that we have to still do until we get to Mashiach comes. We say it wasn't accomplished then, but it did open doors, and he definitely worked further out down. Because you have to say that Moshe did accomplish. The Rebbe speaks about this. How could he have prayed 550 times and no effect? So it says in some form that Moshe looking at Eretz Yisrael, because he did grant him to look. actually caused it easier for them to, when a tzaddik looks at something, it caused it easier for them to conquer, and it made it easier, some say even till this day, that Israel, that we have today, Israel, before Mashiach comes, is because of Moshe's look. These things refine. The reason it didn't happen was they were not on the level, he wanted it, he was on that level. Had he gone to Etzisol, then Mashiach would have come. Basically Mashiach's time, so it would have been Mashiach's time. Okay, we'll stop here, we end Discourse 43. The end of chapter 174, pages 353 till the top of 355.
Beautiful.